Starving, he found her, the woman's last words when the cowboy's heart. Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. The wind moved low across the desert plain like it had somewhere to be, dragging cold sand and dust along the canyon rims. The sky hung in colorless silence. Nothing green survived out here in winter. The trees were thin, brittle, and the snow came in patches, barely enough to notice at first, until it set in your bones and made a man's fingers clumsy. Lauren Beckett stood at the ridge above Dry Creek Pass, staring down the slope without much intention. He wasn't heading anywhere. He hadn't been in weeks. His boots were dry cracked around the heels, his hat stiff from days of wind exposure. The coat he wore, wool, union issue, though the blue had long faded to gray, was missing a button. He carried a bedroll, a sidearm he hadn't drawn in over a year, and a rifle he kept slung across his back out of habit. Not defense, not purpose, just memory. He'd fought at Cold Harbor, lost his brother to gangrene in a Missouri barn, and spent 2 years tracking deserters after the war until one of them put a knife in his gut and a different kind of silence settled into his life. Since then, he hadn't stayed anywhere longer than a week. Didn't trust men, didn't expect kindness, didn't offer it. And still, something caught his eye. Down below, where the rock face sloped toward an old game trail, he saw it, barely, what looked like a body curled beside a dead juniper. No movement, no color, just a shape hunched inward like it had been dropped and left. Lauren didn't move right away. He stared for a long moment. His stomach tightened, not from fear, not exactly, but from something deeper, a kind of recognition. He knew what the desert did to people who lost their way. He'd passed too many of them, bones scattered near old mining routes or hunched beside dry creeks, shoes still tied to skeleton feet. But this one was too recent, still held form, still had cloth hanging. He climbed down slowly, boots careful on the rocks, breath drawn thin from the cold. As he got closer, the shape became clearer, a woman. Young, maybe mid-20s, wrapped in torn fabric that wasn't fit for wind, let alone snow. Her skin was gray where it showed around the wrists. Fingers curled tight like they'd frozen that way. Lips split from exposure. He crouched beside her and leaned in. Her chest rose. Not much, but enough. Lauren dropped to his knees, unwrapped his blanket from his bedroll, and wrapped it tight around her shoulders. His fingers worked without hesitation. He didn't speak, didn't even think to. He touched her throat gently, felt a pulse thin and weak. She didn't flinch, didn't even open her eyes. She was breathing, but just barely. He looked around. The way station. He remembered it from years ago. An old stopover where ranchers used to leave supply crates and salt blocks when moving cattle east. It was a half-mile off the trail, hidden behind a low hill, and mostly forgotten now. The roof had caved in last time he passed it, but the brick stove had still worked. Lauren lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing. Bones and cloth. Her head lolled against his chest. As he carried her, 1,000 thoughts pressed in. What happened to her? Where she came from? Whether someone was looking for her? Whether someone would come for her if they knew he was carrying her now? But he shoved it all down. Questions slowed you down. Questions made things harder. She needed heat. She needed water. That's what mattered. He pushed through the wind, reached the old station, and kicked the door open with his heel. The interior was dark, cold, musty. He laid her down on a pile of old burlap sacks near the stove, threw the blanket back over her, and moved fast to get the fire started. The kindling was dry. He'd hidden some here weeks ago in case he ever circled back. Flint, paper, and wood bark. It took 3 strikes before the flame caught. He fed it slow until heat started crawling across the room like it remembered what it used to do. He boiled snow in a tin cup, waited for it to melt, then let it cool slightly before holding it to her lips. She didn't take it at first. He tipped the cup more, let it wet her mouth. On the 3rd attempt, she swallowed. That was enough to keep going. He tended to her that whole day, sat nearby, knife in hand in case of trouble. Not from her, but from anything else that might track movement. Coyotes, men, both were possible in these hills. She slept through the night without moving. Twice, he checked her breathing. Still there. Still weak. The second morning, her eyes opened. She didn't flinch when she saw him. Didn't scream. Didn't even look surprised. Her voice cracked when she spoke, and it wasn't a cry or a plea or even a question. It was just this: "Don't leave if I don't wake up." Lauren didn't respond. He stared at her, then gave one slow nod. He didn't leave. The snow had stopped falling sometime during the night, but the cold remained, hanging in the corners of the cabin like a second presence. The small fire Lauren built still crackled low in the brick stove, casting a flickering light that danced across the broken floorboards and the stack of sacks where the woman lay half-curled under his wool blanket. She hadn't spoken again since that first sentence, "Don't leave if I don't wake up." She hadn't moved much either, just opened her eyes from time to time, looking not at him but past him, like her mind hadn't caught up with her body. Lauren sat by the wall, his back pressed to the cold wood, arms resting on his knees, eyes locked on her. Not suspicious, but cautious. He didn't know who she was, where she'd come from, what kind of trouble followed her, and that part kept his nerves sharp. A woman doesn't end up out there in rags in the middle of nowhere unless someone or something has driven her to it. And out here in Arizona territory, those things were never simple and they were never kind. Still, she hadn't cried. She hadn't begged. She hadn't tried to get up and run. That said something to him. He'd seen people on the edge before, soldiers, settlers, even children, and there was always a look when someone gave up. She had that look, but she'd spoken. That counted for something. He poured another cup of melted snow, let it cool, and crouched beside her again. Her eyes fluttered open, more focused this time. They landed on the cup first, then slowly moved up to meet his face. No alarm, no fear, just the slow recognition of someone who'd woken up one more time than they expected. He held out the tin. "Drink." Her fingers twitched, but she couldn't lift her arm. He steadied her head and let her sip. She took small gulps, closing her eyes after each one like they hurt. When she finished, he pulled the blanket tighter around her, then sat back again. "Name?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Looked at the ceiling. Looked at the fire. "Iris," she said, voice rough as gravel. "Iris Coleridge." That was all she gave. Ward didn't ask for more. Not yet. He gave a small nod, more to himself than her, and stood to check the fire. He added more wood, stirred the coals, and kept the heat steady. Then he dug through his pack for the last of his jerky and hard biscuit, softened it in hot water, and placed it in a bowl. When he offered it to her, she didn't reach. She looked at it like it was foreign. He sat on the floor beside her and stepped away. She tried once, couldn't lift her hand, then rested a moment and tried again. He didn't help. She needed to do this part herself. After a few attempts, she managed a few bites. Not enough for strength, but enough to stay present. That night, while she dozed, he stepped outside briefly to relieve himself. The wind had died down, but the sky above was black and sharp with stars. The way station stood alone on a ridge of stone and sand, surrounded by emptiness. No smoke on the horizon. No hoofprints. No voices. Still, Lauren scanned the dark for movement out of habit. He didn't trust peace. Peace never lasted. Back inside, he bolted the door and sat down again. He leaned his rifle beside the wall, close enough to reach in a second. She was asleep now, her breathing steadier, her face a little less tight with pain. He studied her features for a moment. Not out of curiosity, out of duty. She was too clean to be a drifter, too starved to be from any settlement nearby. Her shoes were soft-bottomed, not built for the terrain, which meant she hadn't planned to be out here. The bruises on her wrist looked fresh. The way her body curled inward told him she was used to shrinking, used to hiding. Someone had hurt her. That much was clear. And whoever that was, they might still be looking. He should have left her. That's what part of him kept repeating. She wasn't his responsibility. Taking care of someone meant you stayed longer than you should, and staying always cost something. But he didn't leave. Couldn't. Not after that voice. Not after that line. "Don't leave if I don't wake up." He didn't know her. But he stayed. At some point, the fire dimmed low, and the wind crept back in through the cracks. Lauren laid another piece of wood into the stove, stirred the embers back to life, and sat near her again. She stirred slightly in her sleep, but didn't wake. He looked at her hand, the one she'd used to hold the tin cup, and saw how her nails were cracked, skin split at the knuckles. Hands of someone who'd worked, then ran, then fought to survive with nothing. She was strong. He'd give her that. Most would have died already. He adjusted the blanket around her again, more out of instinct than thought, and leaned his head back against the wall. She might not make it, but he was going to try. Morning came slowly, light creeping through the warped slats of the boarded-up windows. Lauren hadn't slept much. He didn't need it the way he used to. Rest was never full anymore, only enough to get to the next day. Iris stirred, blinking as the light touched her face. She saw him still sitting there, still in the same place, same position, boots planted on the wood, rifle nearby. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The third day began with a sound neither of them expected. Her voice, clearer this time, steady enough to be called human again. "Is it morning?" Lauren turned from the stove, where he just poured hot water over crushed coffee beans. He nodded once. "It is." Iris sat up slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She wore a second shirt now, his torn at the elbow but warmer than the rag she came in with. Her own clothes hung near the fire, still damp from where he'd cleaned them. Her hair had dried into uneven strands that clung to her face, and though her skin was still pale, it had regained a trace of color. The swelling in her hands had gone down, though she winced as she flexed her fingers. "Coffee?" he asked. She gave a slow nod. No smile, just the faint look of someone too tired for manners. Lauren brought her a tin cup and placed it in her hands. He didn't help her drink this time. She took it herself, shaky but able. "What day is it?" she asked after a long pause. "Wednesday, I think," he said, though truth be told, he wasn't entirely sure. He hadn't looked at a calendar since the leaves fell. Late January. She looked down at her cup, holding it like it gave her something solid to hold on to. "I thought it was still November." It explained the frostbite, the star body, the damage. She'd been out here longer than he thought. He didn't ask where she'd been or what happened. Not yet. But something in her face said she was measuring how much to give and when. "I didn't think anyone would stop," she said softly. "You're the first." Lauren didn't reply. He stood and went back to the stove, poured his own cup, and sat again on the crate by the wall. They drank in silence. The fire popped once. Later that morning, Iris tried to stand. Lauren moved fast, reaching her elbow, steadying her. She stiffened at his touch. He saw it, but didn't let go until she caught her balance. "I need to move," she said, her voice tense, frustrated with herself. "My legs feel like they belong to someone else." "You'll fall if you rush," he said. "Sit first. Then we try again." She sat on the edge of the sacks, planted her feet, and breathed slowly. The fact she was trying at all meant her body was fighting back. That was a good sign. They tried again later. This time she stood and walked 3 steps with his help before her knees gave out. He caught her, let her down slowly, and handed her more broth. She drank it without argument. A fragile rhythm began to take shape. Lauren stepped out midday to check the surrounding land. He didn't want her far, just far enough to make sure no fresh tracks had come close. The snow had melted around the cabin's south side, where the sun hit longest. No horses, no boot prints, no threats. But he stayed alert anyway. Trust didn't come easy anymore, and the way she flinched when doors creaked or his voice got too loud told him whatever she'd escaped from might not be finished chasing her. When he returned, she was sitting upright, watching the fire. Her eyes followed him as he moved, but she said nothing. Later that evening, while she was resting, he cleaned out the old storage bin near the door. Inside, buried beneath some burlap and spiderwebs, he found 2 dented cans of salted beans and a wrapped brick of hard sugar. He didn't say a word, just set the cans on the table and began to prepare dinner. "You live here?" she asked from her place by the stove. He shook his head. "No one lives here. It's a rest point. I pass through sometimes." She watched him open the can with the side of his knife. "You pass through often?" He scraped the contents into a pot and added water. "Not really. Just knew it'd still be standing." Iris studied his movements. "Why did you stop this time?" He paused for a moment, then gave a slow, honest answer. Saw you. That was enough. She looked away after that, back to the fire, her mouth pressing into a thin line, like she didn't know what to do with that truth. But she didn't push it. That night, they ate beans and dry bread warmed over the flame. She sat cross-legged now, closer to the heat, blanket still around her shoulders. Her posture was straighter, her eyes more alert. She even asked him something small about the bird sounds outside. That's a cactus wren, he said, loud for its size. I heard it before, she said. Back east, they don't sing like that. You from back east? Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. Then, after a breath, Missouri. That was all she offered. And he didn't press. He watched her for a while after she fell asleep. Her breathing had steadied. Her body wasn't shaking anymore. The fear wasn't gone, but it wasn't everything now. Some part of her had decided to fight. And some part of him, quiet, stubborn, and used to caring, decided to help her through it. In the quiet hours before dawn, Lauren sat by the stove, cup empty, eyes fixed on the flame. He didn't know why he stayed. He didn't know what would come next. But she was alive. She wanted to move. And she didn't ask for help unless it was the last thing left to do. That was something he understood better than most. And so, for the third night, he didn't leave. He kept the fire going. He stayed. By the fourth day, Iris could stand on her own. She moved carefully, one hand trailing along the rough edge of the wall as she circled the room with the blanket still around her shoulders. Her steps were slow, deliberate, but they no longer buckled under her. She didn't speak much that morning, but her silence had changed. It wasn't empty now. It was focused. Lauren sat near the stove, sharpening his knife on a whetstone he'd found beneath a pile of old crates. The sound echoed in soft scrapes while he watched her move from behind the brim of his hat. He hadn't asked anything about her past since she said Missouri. Hadn't pressed her to explain how she ended up alone and dying in the open cold. But the questions were there, heavy in the quiet, thick in the air between them. She broke it first. You sleep with your boots on, she said, eyes on the floor. I do, he answered plainly. You always ready to leave? He met her gaze. Used to not be. Then things changed. She didn't press, just nodded once, like that told her what she needed to know. She sat on a low bench against the far wall and pulled the blanket tighter. Her fingers were still cracked, but the swelling was mostly gone. Lauren had left out a half bar of soap, a dry rag, and one of his spare shirts. She'd used all of them without asking. That told him she didn't need permission, she just needed safety. That afternoon, he stepped outside with his rifle and circled the ridge. There was a small stream a quarter-mile east, mostly frozen but still trickling under a thin sheet of ice. He followed it, watching the soil, the pattern of small animal tracks, the broken branches. He wasn't looking for deer or rabbit. He was looking for anything that didn't belong. That's when he saw them, two boot prints, not deep, but recent, pressed into the soft ground behind a thicket of brush just off the trail. One print pointed forward. The other turned back, as if someone had stopped, waited, then walked off again. He crouched, studied the impression. Not his boot. Too narrow. Too clean. Whoever it was, they'd come close, but hadn't pushed further. He rose slowly and scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. No shadow, no sound. Just the wide, empty sky and the sandstone hills beyond it. He didn't run back to the cabin. He didn't panic, but he moved quicker. When he reached the station again, he stepped inside and shut the door behind him with care. Iris was kneeling near the fire, stirring the last of the beans he'd left warming in the pot. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her. She looked up. Something's wrong. He nodded once. Someone's been nearby. She froze, just for a second, then went back to stirring, as if the motion grounded her. How close? Too close. She swallowed hard. Her hand tightened on the spoon. I didn't mean to bring anyone here, she said after a while, her voice low and flat. You didn't, he answered, but she didn't seem to believe it. Not really. He sat across from her. The fire crackled. She stared into it like it would speak if she looked long enough. It was a man, she said finally. He wasn't mine, but he thought I was. He took things from me. My home. My father's land. Then he took my name and told folks I wasn't real anymore. Just a thing that followed him. I tried to leave once. and he locked me inside a barn for 3 days. After that, I stopped trying. Until I didn't. Her hands had stopped moving. I ran through the night. I walked 5 days. No water after the second. I thought I'd die somewhere without a name. And I was fine with that, until you came. Lorne didn't speak. He heard it all, felt it sit heavy in his chest. He'd seen men like that, men who took what wasn't offered and called it theirs. He'd fought beside some, fought against worse. He's not going to find you here, he said. You don't know that, she replied. No, I don't. I'll see him first. She looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes weren't wide with fear. They were sharp with calculation, measuring him, wondering how far she could trust someone who never asked questions. Why are you helping me? She asked. Lauren looked at the wall behind her, then back to her face. Because someone should have helped my brother when he needed it. And no one did. That was all he gave, and all she needed. That night, Lauren didn't sleep much. He stood by the window with his rifle, watching the trees and the stretch of trail beyond the ridge. No one came. No sound stirred. Inside, Iris lay on the bench, blanket pulled high, her breathing soft and steady. Whatever storm had driven her here, whatever man thought he owned her, the wind hadn't carried him this far yet. But Lauren didn't trust peace. Peace was just time before the next thing. He would watch. He would wait. And if that man came, Lauren would be the one waiting. By the 5th morning, the inside of the way station smelled faintly of coffee and burnt wood, and the frost on the window panes had started to melt at the edges. The wind had quieted outside. In that silence, something inside Iris began to settle too. Not completely, not all at once, but enough for her to rise earlier, move slower, and do things without needing to be asked. She started the fire that morning before Lauren had even stood up. He watched from the far side of the room, one hand resting near the rifle, though not out of fear, more out of habit, a rhythm that had kept him alive too long to break now. Iris crouched by the stove, feeding small sticks into the coals, her face drawn but focused. Her movements were stiff, but not weak anymore. She had learned to keep her hands steady. She didn't flinch from the heat. You sleep? She asked without looking back. Lauren gave a short grunt that could have meant anything. I saw you standing again last night, she added. By the window. Didn't like the quiet, he said, setting the pot on the iron grate to boil water. Makes men think they're safe. You think he's coming? I think he knows what he lost. Might come looking. Iris nodded, not with fear, but with something closer to resolve. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Not the way I was. Lauren didn't respond. He didn't want to tell her that fear didn't go away. It just changed shape. But he respected that she wanted to believe it. That day, something shifted between them, quiet and subtle, like the first signs of spring that don't announce themselves until they're already there. Iris cleaned out the shelves in the corner, stacking what little remained. Half a sack of flour, the rest of the sugar brick, some dried cornmeal Lauren hadn't touched in weeks. She washed her clothes again in boiled snow water, hung them near the fire, and asked, casually, if he had anything that needed mending. Lauren, surprised, handed her a flannel shirt with a torn cuff. She stitched it without comment, just needle and thread in her lap, her fingers moving carefully even as the skin still flaked from healing. Later, when he returned from checking the trail, no prints, no smoke, no threat, he found her feeding the mule tied behind the shed. She'd cracked the last apple between a rock and the wall, offered the pieces slowly from her palm. I used to have a dog, she said as he approached. Back before all of it. He'd sit by the fire like he understood every word I didn't say. Lauren nodded. Dogs know things most people don't. They didn't speak for a while after that. Just stood in the winter air, letting it settle between them. Then, without looking at him, Iris said, You used to be in the war. Lauren tensed slightly. That obvious? Only to someone who's seen it too. My father fought. He never came back whole. Lauren stayed silent. She didn't press. She didn't need to. That evening, they cooked together for the first time. It wasn't a decision. She just stood beside him and started chopping the dry jerky as he poured flour into a pan. He didn't stop her. They moved around each other without friction, the space between them familiar now, like it had been built day by day without them noticing. You always alone? She asked, voice even. Lauren hesitated. Since my brother. What happened? He stirred the flour a moment longer than necessary. Then he was sick. We were too far out. Couldn't get help in time. I buried him myself. Iris nodded, eyes down. I'm sorry. Weren't your fault, he said. No, but I know what it's like. To bury someone alone. They sat by the fire after dinner, watching the flames move slow and steady. She handed him the repaired shirt. He folded it without a word. Do you ever go back? She asked. Back where? Where you came from. Lorne shook his head. Ain't nothing there but land gone dry and a fence I tore down. She didn't ask more. Just pulled the blanket over her legs and sat in quiet. Outside, the wind shifted again. A coyote howled in the distance. Lorne stood, checked the windows, then locked the door again. We'll leave soon, he said. She looked up. Leave? This place ain't built for staying. Not with someone out there, maybe still looking. She stared at him for a long moment. You mean to keep going with me? Lorne didn't answer at first. He just looked at her. Not past her. Not through her. Just at her. You asked me not to leave. I didn't. Doesn't change now. For the first time, her face softened. Not with relief, but with understanding. A kind of quiet acceptance that said she no longer needed to ask why. She just needed to believe it. He turned back to the fire, stoked it one more time, and pulled the blanket over his shoulders. In the shadows of that old way station, where trust had grown one moment at a time, they stayed seated near each other, saying nothing. But everything had already been said. The snow came back without warning. It started as a fine dust on the wind, barely more than a shimmer against the bare sandstone ridge. But by nightfall, the wind howled against the walls and pressed cold fingers through the cracks in the boards. Lorne had nailed a blanket across the window, but it fluttered now under the weight of the storm, and the roof moaned like it remembered worse winters. Inside, the fire crackled low. The last of the chopped wood was stacked by the hearth, and the mule had been brought inside the old storage shed behind the station. Lorne had done what he could. Now they had to wait it out. Iris sat on the bench near the fire, legs pulled close, hands cupped around her tin mug. Her clothes were dry now, and she'd managed to clean most of the blood and dirt from her old coat. Still, the cold clung to her like memory. She looked over her shoulder. How long you think it'll last? Lorne sat across from her, slowly whittling a strip of cedar with his pocket knife. He didn't look up. Could be a day, could be 3, and we've got food for 2 days if we go light. She nodded, expression unreadable. He watched her quietly. She didn't panic. That was something. No pacing, no breathless questions, just a kind of steadiness that had grown in her since the first night. But there was something else under it too, something restless in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Lorne set the wood strip aside. You're thinking too hard, he said. Iris stared at the fire. I'm thinking about how fast a person can disappear out here. He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. A gust slammed into the far wall. The boards creaked. A dusting of snow blew in through a split in the roof and landed between them like salt. I used to think if I vanished, it'd be peaceful, she said. Just let the wind take me, no questions left behind. You still think that? No, she said quickly. Now I wonder if I'll ever stop looking over my shoulder. Lorne leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire with her. You will, he said. It takes time, and something worth looking forward to. She turned to face him fully, arms crossed over her chest. And what is it you're looking forward to, Lorne? Where do you go when you leave a place like this? His jaw tightened slightly. That question had chased him for years. I don't go anywhere in particular, he answered. I just don't stay. Why not? He looked down, exhaled through his nose. Because staying costs something. Silence again. But this time, not because there was nothing to say, because both of them were carrying things too heavy to set down yet. The wind outside screamed like a warning. A board near the roof cracked loud enough to make Iris flinch. She stood and moved closer to the fire, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. He noticed the way her shoulders rose and fell. Not fear exactly, but the return of that unease, that uncertainty she worked so hard to hide. He reached behind him, took his bedroll, and tossed it closer to the stove. Lay near the heat. Floor is cold, but better than the bench. She hesitated. What about you? I'll be here. he said, pointing to his seat near the door. She sat slowly, laying the blanket flat first, then lying back, watching the firelight flicker across the ceiling. Lauren sat down again, but this time his hand rested near his revolver. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then, softly, her voice came through the dark. "Why didn't you just leave me there?" He didn't lift his eyes. "Because I know what it's like to wake up with nothing. But you didn't know me. I didn't need to." She turned her head toward him, her face half lit by the fire. "You were alone, weren't you? For a long time. I was better at it than most." She waited, then asked, "Do you ever miss anyone?" He didn't answer right away. "My brother," he said finally. He had this laugh that made everyone think he was stronger than he was. "After he died, everything got too quiet. I'm sorry. So am I." The wind screamed again, shaking the frame of the building. Snow blew in through the shutter cracks. Lauren moved to toss another log on the fire. She sat up. "You think I'll ever be normal again?" she asked. He stood in silence, feeding the fire. Then he turned. "You're more normal than you think. Most folks just pretend they're not broken. You just don't bother pretending." She gave the faintest smile at that. And for the first time since they met, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't pain or fear, just a quiet, tired gratitude. She lay back down and closed her eyes. The storm still howled, the board still creaked, but inside, it felt less like waiting and more like surviving together. Lauren stayed awake most of the night. He didn't know what would happen after the snow passed. He didn't know if the man she feared was out there, still hunting, still tracking. But tonight, they'd held their ground. And it was the first night he didn't feel alone doing it. The storm passed by morning, but left behind a world wiped clean and unnaturally quiet. The land stretched white in every direction. No bird song, no tracks, just wind-carved snowdrifts along the ridge and a thin layer of ice coating the way station door. Lauren cracked it open carefully and stepped out into the brittle light. The sky was clear now, pale blue without warmth, and the sun glinted sharp across the hills like it had something to prove. Inside, Iris moved slowly, folding the blankets, sweeping out the snow that had drifted under the walls, stirring what was left of the meal from the night before. She was stronger now, her steps more confident, her voice steadier. But there was a restlessness in her movements that hadn't been there before, like she could feel something pressing closer, just outside the edge of the silence. Lauren had felt it too. They were nearing the end of something. The cabin had done what it could. It had given shelter, warmth, time, but it wasn't built for living. Not for real. He knew it. She knew it. And whatever was behind her wouldn't stay behind forever. They didn't speak about it, but they didn't have to. That afternoon, Lauren decided they needed supplies, food, bullets, boots that didn't leak snow melt. The nearest town, Hollowstone, was a half-day's ride west. He didn't like towns. Too many eyes, too many questions, but they had no choice. He saddled the mule and packed light. Before he left, Iris stood by the door, watching him tie down the bedroll. "If you see him," she said quietly, "don't speak to him. Don't try to reason. I won't. And don't bring him back here. Even if you think he looks different. Even if he's smiling." Lauren met her eyes. "What's his name?" She hesitated, then spoke the word like it burned her throat. "Marlon Decker." Lauren nodded once, mounted the mule, and rode out without another word. The road to Hollowstone was narrow and winding, flanked by low ridges and stunted pine. Snow still clung to the rocks in spots, but the trail had seen travel. Faint wagon grooves carved in a frozen dirt, the distant echo of hoofbeats ahead. By late afternoon, Lauren reached the edge of town. Hollowstone was barely more than 4 buildings and a barn. General store, saloon, church, and a blacksmith with a stovepipe chimney leaking smoke. The streets were quiet. No music, no laughter. Just the sound of boots on boardwalk planks and the occasional cough behind a curtain. He tied off the mule and stepped into the store. It was warm, dimly lit, the scent of dust and lard in the air. An old man behind the counter gave a short nod, but didn't speak. Lauren gathered flour, beans, matches, a box of cartridges, and 2 tin mugs. He added a small sewing kit, then paused, staring at the rows of boots along the back wall. He found a pair about her size. Strong soles, good laces. Paid in coin, not questions. It was only when he stepped back into the street that he saw the man. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing a gray coat too fine for the region. Standing by the hitching post, arms folded, scanning the storefronts like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Lauren's hand drifted near his coat, not to draw, just to feel the weight. The man looked at him and smiled. It wasn't friendly. Lauren didn't look away. He stepped off the boardwalk and kept walking, slow and measured. He didn't speak, didn't break pace. Just passed within 10 feet of the man and kept going until he was out of the town's edge and back on the trail. He rode harder on the return. The sun had dipped below the ridge by the time he reached the way station. The wind had picked up again. Inside, Iris was sitting near the stove, her hands wrapped in cloth as she cleaned a rusted pot. When she looked up and saw him, she stood quickly. "You saw him." "I saw someone," Lauren said, unloading the mule. "Was it him? Tall, pale, gray coat." Her hands dropped to her sides. "That's him." I didn't speak. Didn't give him anything. "He'll follow." "I know." She stared at the fire for a long moment, then sat down slowly. "What now?" she asked. Lauren looked at her. "We move." She met his eyes, and in hers was the quiet fear of someone who had run once and nearly died for it. "Where?" "There's land near Cotton Ridge," he said. "Passed through it last spring. Rich soil, early thaw, not many people. We could set something up there. Something no one could take." "We?" He didn't flinch. "You said not to leave." "I'm still here." She breathed out, shaky but sure. "Then we leave at first light." That night, they didn't speak much. She tried on the boots. Fit perfectly. He checked the rifle again, cleaned the chamber, laid out the bedroll side by side. Outside, the wind carried no footsteps yet. No shadow on the ridge. But they both knew it was only a matter of time. And when it came, they'd be ready. Together. They left before dawn. The sky was still dark when Lauren saddled the mule, tying down the supplies with firm, silent hands. Iris stood by the doorway, wrapped in the thick blanket he'd given her the night before, her new boots laced tightly, her bag packed and resting by her feet. She didn't ask if he was sure. She didn't look back at the cabin. When he nodded, she climbed onto the mule behind him without a word. They rode in silence through the frozen scrubland, the last of the snow crunching beneath hoof. The air was sharp, the sky bruised with the first signs of daylight, and the wind had a bite that promised more cold behind it. Lauren led them south, toward Cotton Ridge, just as he said. He knew the way by memory, not by map, cutting between dry hills and dead grass, moving without trails. It was slower, but harder to follow. They made camp by a dry creek that night, nestled between tall rocks where the wind couldn't cut through. Lauren lit a fire with care. Iris cooked what she could with beans and water. She didn't say much. Neither did he. But when they ate, they shared the tin cup. When the wind howled, they pulled the blanket tighter across their shoulders. When the fire dimmed, they didn't move apart. The second day was colder and quieter. By dusk, they saw smoke trailing on the northern horizon. Not thick, not close, but too much to ignore. "He's following," Iris said. Lauren looked long at the horizon, then back at her. "Then we let him." That night, they stopped at an old ranger's cabin Lauren remembered from years ago. A single-room structure near the bluff, half collapsed but enough to shield them. He built the fire inside. Iris leaned her back against the wall, pulling her coat tight around her, eyes scanning every shadow like they might move. "I keep thinking I'll feel different once it's over," she said. "It's not over yet." "I know. But when it is, will I feel safe again?" Lauren didn't answer right away. He checked the chamber of his rifle, sat down beside her, and stared into the fire. "Safe ain't a feeling," he said. "It's something you choose to believe, even when your hands won't stop shaking." She turned her head slowly. "Did your hands shake when it happened to you?" He nodded. "First time I killed a man after the war, they shook for 2 days. I was 19. Did they stop?" "Eventually, but I never forgot how it felt." The fire popped between them. She stared into it a long while, and then, quietly, without fear, she said, "If he finds us, I want to face him." Lauren didn't look surprised. "You sure? I don't want you to do it for me." He met her eyes. "I won't. I'll just make sure he doesn't touch you." She nodded once. "That's all I want." They slept in shifts. He stayed awake through most of the night, watching the trilling, listening for hoofbeats, for breath that didn't belong, for anything off. When dawn came, he heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Purposeful. He shook her gently. She sat up immediately. "He's here. Close." She stood without hesitation. Picked up the rifle Lorne had shown her how to hold 2 days earlier. She checked the barrel like he'd taught. Her hands were steady. When the door creaked, Lorne stood beside her. He didn't push her aside. He didn't draw first. The door opened slowly. Marlon Decker stood in the entry, snow dusting his shoulders, his coat immaculate, a smirk that had no warmth beneath his mustache. His eyes swept the room until they landed on her. "There you are," he said, as if nothing had happened. She didn't speak. She didn't move. "I told you," he said, stepping forward. "You wouldn't make it a week without me. Look at you, hiding behind another man again." War didn't speak either. His rifle stayed lowered. Not from weakness, but from choice. Marlon stepped closer. "Come on, Iris. Enough of this. Let's go home." She raised the rifle. He laughed. "You gonna shoot me? You couldn't even raise your voice the last time." "I didn't have anyone to stand with then," she said. He frowned slightly, confused by the steadiness in her voice. She didn't hesitate. She fired once. The shot hit the floor by his feet, spraying dust. "I'll only say it once," she said, voice calm. "Leave." Marlon took a long, slow breath. His eyes darted to Lorne, who hadn't moved. "You really think I'll walk out of here because she says so?" he said. Lorne stepped forward then, slowly, calmly, his voice quiet. "No," he said. "You'll walk out of here because if you don't, I'll put you in the ground." They stared at each other for a long moment. Nothing theatrical, no rage, just the cold recognition of a man who didn't bluff and a man who knew when he'd lost. Marlon turned without another word. They watched him ride off. No last glance, no vow of revenge. Just snow, fading hoofprints, and silence. Iris sat down slowly, set the rifle across her knees. Her hand shook then just a little. Lorne didn't speak. He sat beside her and waited until her breathing slowed. It was done, and whatever came next, it would be theirs to build. On their terms. The days that followed were quiet, not in the way of waiting for something to happen, but in the way of two people beginning to understand what peace could sound like. There were no more tracks behind them, no more smoke on the ridge, no voices calling through the trees. Marlon Decker hadn't come back, and neither of them spoke his name again. It was as if silence had reclaimed the space where fear once lived. They reached Cotton Ridge on the 4th day. The land opened up like it had been waiting, flat stretches of dark, soft earth tucked between distant hills and long windbreaks of cottonwoods that rattled dryly in the breeze. There was a creek nearby, half frozen but flowing, and patches of stubborn green pushing up through the frost, early signs of spring beneath the winter skin. Lorne reined in the mule and looked out over the land. Here, Iris climbed down without needing help. She stood beside him, arms crossed against the cold, studying the land the way one might study a room they'd never seen before, taking in the space, the shape of it, the way it held still under the sky. "It's empty," she said. "It's free," he replied. They built a shelter first. Not a house, just a structure good enough to block the wind. Lorne scavenged wood from the edge of the ridge, cut saplings, stripped branches. Iris boiled water, patched canvas, sorted supplies. They worked without talking much, but their movements had changed, more in rhythm, more like two parts of something that had learned how to move together. He showed her how to dig shallow rows for early planting, how to test soil for frost, how to feel the firmness of earth that would take seed. She didn't ask why he knew so much. He didn't explain, but the truth was simple. After the war, he'd once tried to live like a man who stayed in one place. He'd failed, but now, standing beside her, the old knowledge returned like it hadn't left. At night, they lit a fire in the center of the shelter and sat close. The mule was tied near the stream. The stars above were clear. The air didn't bite as hard. They didn't call it home, but neither of them mentioned leaving. On the second evening, Iris stood alone at the edge of the ridge, staring out across the horizon. Lorne approached without sound, then stood beside her. She didn't look at him when she spoke. I've spent so long running. I don't know how to stand still. You just did, he said. She let out a slow breath. What if I forget how to be something other than afraid? He looked out at the dark stretch of soil ahead of him. You won't. Not here. She turned to him. How do you know? Because when I look at you now, you're not hiding anymore. Her eyes shimmered a little at that, but she didn't look away. Instead, she asked a question that had been sitting at the back of her throat for days. Are you going to stay this time? Lauren didn't answer right away. He looked down at the earth beneath their feet, then out toward the line where sky met soil. I've got nowhere else I want to be. That night, they shared a blanket beneath the shelter. Not out of necessity, but because neither of them wanted to sleep apart anymore. There was no pretense, no spoken promise, just warmth and rest, and the sound of breath that no longer had to hold itself quiet. The next morning, she planted her first seed. She dug the hole, pressed the root in with both hands, then covered it carefully. He watched her do it. She didn't look up when she was finished, just wiped her hands and moved to the next. He joined her. By midday, they planted 20 rows. Not once did they speak of the past. Not once did they say what would come after. But the land accepted them. And in return, they stayed. For the first time in their lives, neither of them was running. They were building. The thaw came early that year. By late March, the frost had pulled back from the edge of the creek, and small wildflowers began to push through the soil near the cottonwoods. The ridge behind their shelter softened with new grass, and the rows they'd planted weeks earlier, rows dug in silence, watered by careful hands, began to stir with the first signs of life. Shoots of green curled up into the light, stubborn, alive. Iris knelt at the garden bed every morning now. She wore her sleeves rolled to the elbow and kept her hair tied back with a strip of canvas she'd cut herself. Her hands were still marked with old cracks, but they moved confidently through the dirt, patting it smooth, pulling weeds, testing moisture by feel. She didn't ask Lauren to help anymore. He did it anyway. They had built a second wall to the shelter by then, added a roof panel from salvage boards Lauren had hauled from an old post station 3 miles off.